Hey there. Tonight we begin with a journey into the hidden languages of the heart in medieval Europe, where expressing romantic love required elaborate codes and secret signals, where social constraints and arranged marriages made open declarations dangerous or impossible, where flowers carried messages, where jewellery spoke volumes, where gestures and glances conveyed what words could not safely say, and where the entire culture of courtly love developed partly a sophisticated system for communicating forbidden feelings, through symbols that only the intended recipients could fully understand. From the language of flowers that predated Victorian times by centuries, to the musical codes embedded in troubadour songs, from the visual symbolism of dress and ornament to the architectural features of gardens designed for secret meetings, from the go-betweens who carried messages to the dangers that discovery brought, the story of how medieval lovers communicated in secret reveals a world where romance and risk intertwined, where creativity flourished under constraint, and where the human need to express love found countless ingenious outlets, despite societies structured to control and channel affection into politically expedient marriages. So before settling in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if genuinely enjoying what's shared here. And let those comments know where the listening is happening from and what time it is there. It's always wonderful to see who's joining from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. When thinking about medieval love, images emerge from romances and legends. Lancelot and Guinevere, Tristan and Isolde, courtly lovers pining from afar, knights performing deeds to win ladies' favour. These literary representations reflect real cultural patterns, where love and marriage often existed separately, where passionate romantic attachment frequently occurred outside marriage bonds, and where expressing such feelings required discretion and coded communication that protected participants while allowing emotional expression. The necessity for secret communication arose from medieval marriages' political and economic nature. Noble marriages were arranged to create alliances, consolidate properties, and advance family interests, with the individual's romantic feelings being irrelevant or even problematic. Yet humans being human, romantic attachments formed regardless of social constraints, and these attachments, whether between married persons and others, between people promised to different spouses, or between individuals of incompatible social ranks, required communication systems that allowed expression while minimizing risks of discovery. Picture this, a medieval castle in France, perhaps around 1250. A lady married to a lord she barely knew before their wedding watches from a window, as a young knight practices in the courtyard. Their eyes meet briefly, and in that glance passes a message that words could not safely convey. Later she wears a particular colour. He responds by wearing a matching ribbon, and a conversation begins that uses no words, but that both understand perfectly. The dance of signals, symbols and secret meanings has started, and it will continue through gestures, gifts, intermediaries, and countless subtle communications that turn everyday objects and actions into vehicles for expressing what society forbids openly declaring. Tonight's journey explores the secret codes and communication systems that medieval lovers developed, the language of flowers and objects, the symbolism of colours and jewels, the role of go-betweens and love letters, the codes embedded in poetry and music, the visual signals in dress and gesture, the architecture of secret meetings, and the very real dangers that discovery brought. From the elaborate courtly love tradition that provided cultural framework for secret romance, to the practical realities of how actual lovers communicated across social barriers and marital obligations, the story reveals both the creativity that constraints inspire and the genuine human emotions that persisted despite society's attempts to reduce love to political arrangement. Long before the Victorian language of flowers became codified and published in popular manuals, medieval lovers employed botanical symbolism to communicate feelings and messages. The use of flowers, herbs, and plants as symbols with specific meanings allowed lovers to exchange sentiments publicly that would have been dangerous to express directly, creating a botanical code that was widely understood within courtly culture, while remaining deniable if questioned. The rose held central position in medieval flower symbolism, though its meanings were complex and varied by context. The red rose signified passionate love and desire, its colour evoking blood and the heart's fire. A lady receiving red roses understood the sender's ardent feelings, while sending red roses herself declared reciprocal passion. The white rose conveyed different messages: purity, secrecy, and discretion. The phrase sub rosa, under the rose, meant that what was said or done was confidential, deriving from the medieval practice of hanging roses over meeting places to indicate that discussions were private. The symbolic progression of roses told stories. A bud represented young love, or a maiden not yet ready for romance. A fully bloomed rose signified love in its fullness, while a wilting rose warned of love's fading or of danger to the relationship. The thornless rose, when artificially created through careful cutting, symbolized love so perfect it held no pain, though such roses were rare and their creation labor-intensive, making them particularly precious gifts. Violets carried messages of faithfulness and humility. Their small size and tendency to grow in hidden places made them symbols of modest, hidden love that didn't seek public display. A lover sending violets declared constancy and indicated willingness to love in secret without demanding public acknowledgement. The violet's purple colour also connected it to passion, creating layered meaning, faithful hidden passion that would endure without public recognition. Forget-me-nots had meanings as obvious as their name suggests. Sending these small blue flowers pleaded with the beloved not to forget the sender, not to let distance or time diminish memory and affection. For lovers separated by circumstances, a knight leaving on campaign, a lady sent to another estate, a man travelling on business. Forget-me-nots served as botanical reminders of enduring attachment despite separation. Lilies symbolized purity and virtue, but their use in romantic contexts carried subtle meanings. White lilies declared that the sender's love, while passionate, remained pure and honourable rather than merely lustful. For lovers in situations where consummation was impossible or unwise, lilies communicated that affection transcended physical desire. The lily could also serve as gentle reproach, reminding a too ardent lover that the beloved demanded respect and restraint. Pansies derived their symbolic association with thoughts from their French name, pensées. Sending pansies meant, "I think of you," declaring that the beloved occupied the sender's thoughts constantly. The tricolour pansies with purple, yellow and white added layers. The colours sometimes interpreted as representing faith, remembrance and love together, creating complex messages within a single flower. Ivy represented fidelity and eternal affection because it clings and endures. Its evergreen nature and its tendency to grow stronger with time made ivy symbol of love that would not fade or fail. Wreaths of ivy given as gifts declared undying attachment, while ivy incorporated into other arrangements added assurances of constancy to whatever other messages the flowers conveyed. Rosemary signified remembrance and was particularly associated with funerals and mourning, but in romantic contexts its meaning shifted to remembrance of happier times, of vows exchanged, of moments shared. A sprig of rosemary hidden in a message or gift whispered, "Remember our time together," and created shared reference to specific memories meaningful only to the lovers. Lavender carried messages of devotion and virtue, combined with its pleasant scent making it popular in sachets and personal items. Lavender given as gift communicated admiration for the beloved's virtue while declaring the sender's devoted attachment. The practical uses of lavender in clothing storage, in bathing, in air freshening, meant that gifts of lavender could be integrated into daily life, providing constant sensory reminders of the giver. Daisies represented innocence and new beginnings. The simple field flower contrasted with cultivated roses and lilies, suggesting uncomplicated, honest affection. Daisies given to a beloved declared pure, straightforward love without complex courtly games. The practice of pulling daisy petals while reciting, he loves me not," may have medieval origins, though documentation is limited. Marigolds held ambiguous symbolism. In some contexts they represented devotion and constant love, because they followed the sun throughout the day. In other contexts they warned of jealousy or suggested grief. The dual meanings made marigolds useful for complex messages, declaring devotion while warning about jealousy, or expressing love while acknowledging pain. Columbine's complex shape and multiple colours made it symbol of folly or of forsaken love in some traditions. Yet its botanical name, Aquilegia, referenced eagles, and some interpretations associated it with courage. The ambiguity made columbine useful for messages acknowledging relationships' difficulties, while asserting determination to continue despite obstacles. Honeysuckle represented devoted affection and the bonds of love. Its twining growth pattern symbolized lovers intertwined, while its sweet scent suggested pleasure found in affection. Honeysuckle in arrangements or grown where lovers met created botanical testament to their connection's strength. The presentation mattered as much as the flower chosen. A single stem carried different weight than a bouquet. Fresh flowers suggested immediate passion, while dried flowers indicated enduring memory of past moments. Flowers incorporated into wreaths, poses, or more complex arrangements created messages through combination. Roses for passion, ivy for fidelity, rosemary for remembrance, together declared passionate, faithful love that would be remembered forever. The seasonal availability of flowers added temporal dimensions to messages. Spring flowers suggested new love or renewed passion after winter separation. Summer blooms indicated love in full flower, abundant and warm. Autumn flowers carried melancholy undertones, acknowledging seasons passing and love perhaps fading. Winter gifts of preserved flowers or evergreens declared love that endured despite cold and darkness. The growing of particular flowers in a lady's garden could signal her receptiveness to particular messages. A garden full of roses invited passionate declarations. Herbs and practical plants suggested a lady more interested in virtue and practical partnership than romantic passion. The careful observer could read the garden as text indicating the lady's character and preferences. The herbal properties added another layer. Flowers and herbs with medicinal uses or pleasant scents served practical purposes that made their giving socially acceptable, even when romantic subtext existed. A lady could accept gifts of lavender or rosemary for their useful properties, while understanding the romantic message they carried, and observers seeing such gifts couldn't definitively prove improper intent. The religious symbolism many flowers carried in Christian contexts created both complications and opportunities. The lily's association with the Virgin Mary made it simultaneously pure and potentially subversive when used in secular romantic contexts. Was the sender praising the beloved's purity, or was the comparison to Mary itself a form of sacred profane boundary crossing? The ambiguity provided useful cover while adding layers of meaning for those who understood. The language of flowers thus provided medieval lovers with sophisticated communication system, where botanical gifts and displays conveyed complex messages, declared feelings, made requests, offered reassurances, and created ongoing dialogues through symbolic exchanges that casual observers might not fully decode. The system's effectiveness depended on shared cultural knowledge about flower symbolism and on participants' ability to interpret subtle variations in presentation, combination, and context. The botanical code allowed genuine communication while maintaining plausible deniability. The flowers were just flowers, beautiful gifts without deeper meaning, unless one knew how to read their hidden language. The courtly love tradition that flourished in medieval Europe, particularly in 12th and 13th century France, provided cultural framework and elaborate vocabulary for romantic relationships that existed outside or alongside marriage. Understanding courtly love's codes and conventions reveals how an entire culture developed around secret or semi-secret romantic attachments, and how this cultural system provided both language and legitimacy for feelings that social structures tried to control or deny. The origins trace to southern France and the troubadour tradition, where poet-musicians composed elaborate songs praising noble ladies, declaring undying devotion and describing love's sufferings and joys. The troubadours created literary convention, where the lover, typically a knight or nobleman of lesser rank, devoted himself utterly to a lady, typically of higher rank, often married, who became his domina or mistress in the feudal sense, the lord to whom he owed service and obedience. The structural parallels between courtly love and feudal loyalty were deliberate and extensive. Just as a vassal swore fealty to his lord, the courtly lover pledged absolute devotion to his lady, the terminology borrowed from feudal relationships, service, homage, loyalty, reward, but applied to romantic and potentially sexual relationships, rather than political and military ones. The parallel created legitimate vocabulary for discussing relationships that society otherwise provided no language for. The stages of courtly love followed, recognized progression, that structured relationships and created shared framework for understanding where particular relationships stood. The first stage, Venidor, involved the lover admiring from afar, suffering silently without declaration. The second stage, Precador, saw the lover daring to speak, to approach the lady, to declare his feelings and request her acknowledgement. The third stage, Intendidor, occurred when the lady accepted the lover's service and granted him status as recognised admirer. The fourth stage, Drut, involved intimacy, though whether this meant physical consummation or merely emotional intimacy was deliberately ambiguous and varied by interpretation. The rules of courtly love, while never formally codified in a universally accepted text, nonetheless followed recognised patterns. Love must be freely given, not compelled. Love and marriage were incompatible. True love required freedom and choice that marriage's obligatory nature precluded. Love must be secret, or at least discreet, as publicity destroyed the special intimacy lovers shared. The lover must suffer, love without pain, and longing wasn't true love. The beloved must be worthy, typically of higher rank than the lover, making the love aspirational rather than possessive. The literary expressions in troubadour poetry, romances, and courtly literature created shared vocabulary and reference points. Lovers could allude to Lancelot and Guinevere, to Tristan and Isolde, to countless other literary lovers, and through these references communicate complex ideas about their own situations. The literary framework meant that real lovers could discuss their relationships using literary conventions, maintaining deniability while everyone understood the real-life applications. The physical manifestations of courtly love created visible codes. The knight wore his lady's favour, a ribbon, a glove, a token, openly displayed on his person or his equipment, declaring his devotion to whoever could read the sign. The lady might wear colours associated with her lover, or jewellery he'd given, creating visual connections visible to observers who understood the code. The public displays were simultaneously open, everyone could see them, and secret in that their romantic significance could be denied as mere courtesy or fashion. The religious language borrowed for courtly love created complex ironies and opportunities. Lovers described themselves as worshipping their beloveds, borrowed language from religious devotion, and elevated human love to quasi-religious status. The blasphemous edge, treating a human beloved with language reserved for God, created frisson while also providing cover, as the exaggerated religious language could be dismissed as merely poetic convention rather than literal description of actual feelings or relationships. The concept of finamore, refined or perfect love, distinguished courtly love from mere lust or ordinary affection. Finamore ennobled participants, made them better people through love's refining fire. The lover became more valorous, more virtuous, more accomplished through service to his beloved. The lady became more gracious, more worthy, more perfect through being properly loved. The mutual elevation through romantic attachment provided justification for relationships that otherwise seemed merely adulterous or socially inappropriate. The courts of love, literary and possibly real gatherings where questions of love were debated and judged, created quasi-judicial framework for discussing romantic relationships and their proper conduct. Whether these courts actually existed or were purely literary fiction remains debated, but the concept allowed for systematic discussion of love's rules and proper behaviour. The judgments attributed to figures like Eleanor of Aquitaine and her daughter Marie de Champagne on questions of love and lovers' proper conduct created authoritative rulings that participants in courtly love culture could reference. The test and proving motifs required lovers to demonstrate devotion through accomplishing difficult tasks, enduring separations, maintaining secrecy despite temptations to reveal their love. The testing served multiple purposes. It proved the lover's sincerity, it provided content for the relationship through challenges overcome, and it created narrative structure that gave meaning to what might otherwise be simple, illicit desire. The role of the go-between, confidant, messenger, facilitator, became formalized in courtly love literature and practice. The trusted servant, the sympathetic friend, the lady's attendant who arranged meetings and carried messages became stock characters because they played essential real-world roles. The go-between allowed communication while maintaining discretion and provided witness to the relationship's noble character versus mere sordid affair. The calendar of love created temporal structure, May Day celebrations, spring festivals, the seasons of the year all carried romantic associations. May was love's month. Spring was for new love's beginning, summer for love's full flowering, autumn for melancholy as lovers face separation, winter for testing love's endurance. The seasonal cycle provided metaphoric framework and practical timing for relationships' phases. The gift-giving codes established meanings for various objects exchanged. Rings symbolized commitment and union, gloves represented intimacy and possession. Giving one's glove granted permission to touch belts, and girdles had erotic overtones while serving practical purposes that made them acceptable gifts. Books, particularly of poetry or romances, declared shared cultural interests while their contents carried romantic messages. The careful selection of appropriate gifts demonstrated sophistication and understanding of courtly codes. The boundaries between courtly love literature and actual practice remain contested by historians. Some argue courtly love was purely literary convention, with little connection to real behaviour. Others see extensive evidence that real relationships followed patterns described in literature, though perhaps with less elaborate ritual than romances depicted. The truth likely lies between literature-influenced behaviour, real relationships inspired literature, and the boundary between fiction and reality was deliberately blurred. The social functions of courtly love included providing safe outlet for romantic feelings that couldn't be expressed through marriage, creating culture that valued and refined emotional expression, elevating women's status by making them objects of devotion rather than merely property, and providing training ground for sophisticated social relationships that served nobles well in political contexts. The elaborate courtesy, the careful attention to others' feelings, the skill at interpreting subtle signals, all these had applications beyond romantic relationships. The subversive potential was real. Courtly, love-celebrated relationships outside marriage, valued individual choice over family arrangement, and elevated emotional attachment over political calculation. Yet the subversion was contained within limits. Courtly love remained elite practice, rarely challenged marriage directly, and often remained unconsummated in practice, even when literature suggested otherwise. The system allowed emotional release while channeling it in ways that didn't fundamentally threaten social structures. Understanding courtly love reveals how medieval culture created elaborate framework for romantic relationships that social structures otherwise denied legitimate expression. The codes, conventions, vocabulary, and practices associated with courtly love provided both genuine communication system for real lovers and cultural ideal that shaped how people understood romance, expressed affection, and navigated between desire and social obligation. The courtly love tradition's influence extended well beyond medieval period, shaping Western romantic ideals and cultural assumptions about love's nature that persist in modified forms even today. The role of intermediaries in facilitating communication between medieval lovers was crucial, as direct contact was often impossible or dangerous. Understanding who served as go-betweens, how they operated, and what risks they faced reveals the practical realities of secret romantic communication and the networks of complicity required to maintain forbidden relationships. The lady's maid or attendant occupied the most important position among go-betweens. These women had constant access to the lady, knew her schedule, could deliver messages and receive responses, and could arrange meetings without arousing excessive suspicion. The relationship between lady and personal servant often involved genuine affection and trust that made the servant invested in the lady's happiness and willing to take risks on her behalf. The selection of which servants to trust required careful judgment. A loyal servant who could be trusted with dangerous secrets was invaluable, while a treacherous one could destroy reputations and even endanger lives. Ladies cultivated particular servants through kindness, through sharing confidences gradually to test discretion, and through rewards that created bonds of gratitude and mutual interest. A servant who facilitated a lady's romance often received gifts, special treatment, and the lady's protection in other matters. The squire or page serving a knight could perform similar functions for male lovers. Young men in service to knights had access to their lord's private spaces, could carry messages plausibly as part of their duties, and could arrange their master's schedules to enable secret meetings. Like ladies' maids, trusted squires became essential facilitators whose discretion and loyalty enabled relationships to continue. The chaplain or confessor occupied an interesting position. Religious figures had legitimate access to both men and women, could speak privately with either sex without arousing suspicion, and operated under seal of confession that theoretically protected confidentiality. Some priests and monks apparently served as go-betweens, despite the ethical complications, rationalizing their involvement as pastoral care or as lesser evil than alternatives. The moral ambiguity of religious figures facilitating potentially adulterous relationships created tensions that literature and sermons sometimes addressed. The merchant or trader travelling between estates and towns could carry messages over distances that servants couldn't cover without arousing suspicion. A merchant visiting multiple households on business could deliver letters or verbal messages as apparently casual additions to commercial activities. The merchant's access to different social levels, dealing with both noble households and common traders, made him useful conduit for communications across social boundaries. The minstrel or jongleur entertained at various courts and could carry messages in song lyrics, deliver letters during visits, or provide information about distant lovers. The travelling entertainer's mobility and their access to noble households made them valuable intermediaries for lovers separated by distance. The practice of embedding messages in songs created an additional layer of communication. The minstrel could perform publicly while the intended recipient understood the personal message. The distant relative or family friend who visited regularly could serve as intermediary without arousing suspicion. Someone who had legitimate reasons to visit, who could speak with both parties naturally as part of social intercourse, and who had established pattern of contact could facilitate communication and even meetings under cover of ordinary social interaction. The methods of message delivery varied in sophistication. Simple verbal messages carried by servants worked for basic communication, but risked misunderstanding and left no record. Useful for deniability, but problematic for complex communication. Written messages provided clarity and could be preserved as treasured mementos, but created dangerous physical evidence if discovered. The decision whether to risk written communication or to rely on verbal messages involved calculating risks versus benefits. The letters themselves, when written, employed various techniques for secrecy. Some lovers used simple codes, substituting symbols for names, or using agreed-upon references that would be meaningless to interceptors. Others wrote in Latin or French when English was expected, creating linguistic barrier to casual readers. Some embedded messages within apparently innocent content. A letter discussing estate management might contain hidden message in first letters of each line, or in particular word choices that carried private meanings. The concealment of letters required creativity. Letters hidden in clothing, in jewellery boxes, in books, or in other personal items could be retrieved by intended recipients, while remaining invisible to others. Some letters were destroyed immediately after reading to prevent discovery, though this meant nothing remained to cherish or reread. The tension between wanting to preserve precious communications and needing to destroy evidence shaped how lovers managed their correspondence. The delivery timing and locations required careful planning. Messages delivered at specific times, during Mass, during mealtimes, during social gatherings, could be passed with less visibility than at other moments. The selection of delivery locations, a garden, a chapel, a private chamber, affected both possibility of successful delivery and risks of interception. Skilled go-betweens learned to read situations and to choose optimal moments and places for message delivery. The verbal messages carried particular content patterns, simple declarations of affection, requests for meetings, warnings about dangers, and responses to previous communications formed the core content. The phrasing often used established conventions from courtly love, describing suffering, declaring devotion, requesting mercy or favour, acknowledging the beloved's perfection. The conventional language provided both cover and shared vocabulary that ensured understanding. The arrangement of meetings required even more elaborate planning than message delivery, finding times when both lovers could be absent from expected locations without arousing suspicion, identifying private locations where they wouldn't be interrupted, and creating plausible explanations for absences all required careful thought. Go-betweens often served as lookouts, warning of approaching danger, or as providers of alibis. A lady's maid might claim the lady was in prayer, while a squire might say his knight was practicing swordsmanship. The gardens, chapels, and remote rooms in castles and manor houses became standard meeting places. Gardens offered privacy, while being legitimate locations for ladies to walk. Chapels provided spaces for private prayer that couldn't be interrupted without sacrilege. Remote rooms, particularly in large castles with many chambers, could serve as meeting places if access could be managed discreetly. The architecture of medieval buildings, with their many spaces and complicated layouts, created opportunities for private meetings that more open modern architecture wouldn't allow. The payment and rewards for go-betweens varied by relationship and circumstances. Direct payment in money was possible, but risky as it created evidence of corruption. Gifts of clothing, jewellery or other items served as rewards that could be explained as ordinary generosity. Protection and advancement, helping a servant's family, recommending a squire for knighthood, arranging a favourable marriage for a maid, provided rewards that created lasting loyalty while being less obviously connected to service as go-between. The risks to go-betweens were real and significant. Discovery could lead to dismissal from service, to corporal punishment, to imprisonment, or even to execution, if the relationship involved persons of very high rank or if the discovered affair scandalised sufficiently. The dependent position of servants meant they had little recourse if punished, making their willingness to take risks testimony to either their devotion to those they served or their assessment that rewards outweighed dangers. The complicity networks extended beyond single go-betweens to include multiple people who knew about relationships and who collaborated in maintaining secrecy. A lady's entire household of women might be aware of her romance and might collectively work to facilitate it, creating redundancy and support that single go-between couldn't provide. The network approach meant that discovery required breaking multiple people's silence rather than just one, though it also multiplied the points of vulnerability. The dramatic literature and records of scandals reveal these networks occasionally failed. Dismissed servants seeking revenge, rivals seeking to damage reputations, family members discovering evidence, or simply bad luck led to revelations that destroyed relationships and punished all involved. The historical records, precisely because they focus on spectacular failures, probably overrepresent disaster compared to the countless secret relationships that remained secret because go-betweens successfully protected them. Understanding the role of go-betweens reveals that secret romantic communication in medieval times wasn't just a matter of codes and symbols, but required human infrastructure, people willing to take risks, capable of maintaining discretion, and skilled at managing complex logistics of message delivery and meeting arrangement. The lovers depended utterly on these intermediaries, and the relationships between nobles and their trusted servants often involved genuine bonds that made the servants invested in their master's or mistress's happiness beyond merely mercenary calculation. The networks of complicity that enabled secret romances demonstrate that love, even when socially forbidden, could inspire loyalty and risk-taking from wider circles than just the lovers themselves. The medieval emphasis on visual display and the elaborate symbolism of clothing, jewellery and ornament created rich vocabulary for silent communication between lovers. Understanding how appearance conveyed messages reveals sophisticated visual code system where what one wore, how one wore it, and when one wore it, all carried meanings that informed observers could read. The colour symbolism was fundamental and widely understood. Red signified passion, desire, and courage. Wearing red declared bold emotions and willingness to act on them. Blue represented faithfulness and constancy, suggesting reliable, enduring affection rather than fleeting passion. Green indicated youth, hope, and new love, making it popular choice for young lovers. Beginning relationships, gold and yellow, suggested wealth and nobility but also jealousy in some contexts. White meant purity and innocence. Black could indicate mourning but also sophistication, and sometimes illicit love conducted in darkness and secrecy. The deliberate wearing of matching or complementary colours by lovers created visible if deniable connection. A knight wearing blue and a lady appearing in matching blue created visual link that observers could note without definitive proof of romantic relationship. The matching could be subtle, a ribbon, a lining that showed occasionally, an ornament, rather than obvious coordination that would be too blatant. The subtlety allowed plausible deniability while communicating to the intended recipient. The jewellery carried extraordinarily rich symbolic weight, Rings symbolised commitment and union, with their circular shape representing eternity. Exchange of rings between lovers created binding pledge even without formal marriage. The rings might be worn on different fingers or on chains around necks rather than on ring fingers, hiding their significance from casual observers while remaining constantly present for the wearers. Some rings contained hidden compartments for messages or locks of hair, creating literal containers for secret communications. The brooches and pins served both functional and symbolic purposes. The brooches that held clothing together could be shaped as hearts, flowers, hands clasped, or other symbols of love and loyalty. A lady wearing a particular brooch given by her lover declared her acceptance of his devotion, while changing which brooch she wore could signal changing emotions or responses to situations. The heraldic symbols on brooches could reference the giver without being obvious about romantic connection. The love knots, complex interlaced designs that appeared in jewellery, embroidery and decoration, symbolised the binding together of lovers in relationships that couldn't easily be untangled. The specific knot patterns could be unique to particular couples, creating visual signatures recognisable to the lovers, while being decorative abstractions to others. The intricacy of love knots reflected the complexity of the relationships they symbolised. The girdles and belts worn by women carried erotic significance beyond their practical function. The giving of a girdle was intimate gift implying possession and access to the beloved's person. A lady wearing a gifted girdle constantly felt its presence on her body, creating physical reminder of the giver. The elaborate decoration of some girdles, with precious metals and jewels, made them valuable objects suitable for gifting, while their intimate placement on the body added layers of meaning. The gloves served as potent symbols of intimacy and permission. Giving one's glove granted symbolic permission to touch, to possess, to be intimate. A knight carrying a lady's glove or wearing it in his hat displayed her favour publicly, declaring his devotion and her acceptance. The practice of knights requesting ladies' gloves as tokens before tournaments or battles created socially acceptable context for exchange that carried deeper romantic significance between actual lovers. The sleeves, particularly elaborate hanging sleeves that could be detached from gowns, became tokens exchanged between lovers. The practice of giving one's sleeve as favour to a knight had practical origins. The fabric could be worn as mark of allegiance, but evolved into romantic ritual where the exchanged sleeve declared the relationship's intimate character. The temporary nature of sleeve attachment meant they could be removed and worn by another without permanently altering garments. The headdresses and veils worn by married women versus unmarried created visual distinctions that could carry messages. The way a woman wore her headdress, loosely versus tightly, covering all hair versus allowing some to show, simple versus elaborate, could indicate her state of mind and her receptiveness to romantic attention. The adjusting of veils and headdresses created opportunities for gestural communication discussed below. The positioning of jewellery on the body conveyed meanings. A brooch worn over the heart versus on the shoulder, a ring on the right hand versus left, a necklace worn short versus long. All these variations could carry agreed-upon significance between lovers. The positioning changes could respond to situations, wearing a ring on a particular finger signalling availability for meeting, moving it to another finger indicating danger or postponement. The emblems and badges worn on clothing could reference beloved without being obvious. A gentleman wearing a badge featuring a particular flower could be honouring his lady who favoured that flower, creating connection visible to informed observers while maintaining cover of mere decoration. The heraldic symbols, combining elements from two different houses, could hint at desired union between members of those houses. The handkerchiefs and small fabric items carried multiple meanings. These items were personal, touched the body, absorbed scent, and could be easily given and concealed. A handkerchief embroidered by a lady and given to her lover carried her work, her scent, her touch. The gentleman carrying it kept part of her with him constantly, while displaying it publicly declared his devotion. The practice of ladies dropping handkerchiefs that gentlemen would retrieve and return created scripted interactions that allowed brief conversation and touch. The fans, while perhaps more associated with later periods, had medieval precursors in decorative objects that could be wielded to create signals, the folding and unfolding of objects, the positioning of decorative items, the handling of accessories, all created gestural vocabulary discussed more below but intimately connected to the objects themselves. The pomanders and scent balls worn on chains or belts served both practical purpose of providing pleasant scent and symbolic purpose of containing herbs with romantic associations. A pomander containing lavender, roses, or other symbolically meaningful plants became wearable message declaring the wearer's emotions and affiliations. The sharing of scents, a gentleman using the same perfumes as his lady, created olfactory connection that complemented visual codes. The temporary nature of some visual signals allowed communication that changed frequently. A lady might wear a particular necklace only on days when meeting was possible, removing it when danger made meeting too risky. A gentleman might appear in particular colours on certain days according to prearranged schedule, allowing calendar-based communication where the date itself determined the message. The ephemeral nature of such signals made them difficult to detect as systematic communication versus random fashion choices. The response system created dialogues through sequential visual displays. A lady seeing her lover wear her colours might respond the next day by wearing an item he'd given her, acknowledging his signal and reciprocating the sentiment. The back and forth of visual messages created ongoing conversation that required no words and that could continue even when the lovers never spoke directly, being separated by circumstances or by social restrictions on interaction. The dangers of visual codes included the possibility of misreading signals, of observers learning to interpret the codes, and of wearing something that inadvertently sent wrong message. The plausible deniability that made visual codes safe also made them ambiguous. Was the matching colour coincidence or declaration? The ambiguity protected lovers, but also created uncertainty that could cause misunderstandings and anxiety. The visual code's effectiveness depended on shared cultural literacy about symbolism and on the establishment of private variations on public symbols. While general colour symbolism was widely understood, lovers could establish private meanings that modified or reversed standard interpretations, creating personal code within broader cultural system. The layering of public and private meanings created communication system visible yet invisible. Everyone could see it, but only the intended recipients truly understood it. Understanding visual codes reveals medieval lovers' sophisticated use of appearance as communication medium. Every aspect of dress, ornament and display could carry message, creating elaborate visual language that allowed constant communication even in situations where speech was impossible or dangerous. The codes combined public cultural knowledge with private agreements, creating systems simultaneously open and secret that enabled lovers to maintain relationships and express feelings despite social constraints designed to prevent exactly such communications. The troubadours, trouvères, and minnesingers who created medieval Europe's musical and poetic traditions weren't merely entertainers, but often served as communicators of coded romantic messages. The songs they composed and performed could contain personal messages to specific individuals while appearing to be general artistic expressions, creating a sophisticated system where art became vehicle for secret communication. The troubadour tradition originating in southern France established conventions that spread throughout Europe. These poet-musicians composed elaborate songs in Occitan language praising ladies, describing love's joys and sufferings, and exploring romantic themes with sophistication that created shared vocabulary for discussing love. The conventions established by famous troubadours like Bernard de Ventadorn, Arnaud Daniel, and others created frameworks that later lovers could employ for their own purposes. The encoded personal references within apparently general love poetry allowed poets to address specific individuals while maintaining public deniability. A song praising a lady's golden hair might be ostensibly general, but would be understood by a particular blonde lady as personal address. The descriptions could include details, a gesture, a memory, a shared reference, that identified the intended recipient while remaining opaque to general audiences. The senhal or pseudonym allowed poets to name their beloveds while maintaining plausible deniability. The troubadours developed practice of referring to their ladies by coded names: Bellvezzer, fair to see, Mils de Ben, better than good, Aziman, magnet, that identified specific women to informed audiences while protecting identities from others. The senhals allowed specific address while maintaining discretion, creating a naming system that was simultaneously public and secret. The couplets or stanzas could contain acrostic messages where first letters of lines spelled names or messages. The technique required sophisticated poetic construction to make the acrostic work while maintaining the poem's surface meaning and poetic quality. Lovers familiar with the technique would check poems for acrostics that might reveal hidden messages intended specifically for them. The musical settings added another dimension of communication. Particular melodies could be associated with specific emotions or situations, so hearing a familiar melody even with different words might trigger memories and associations. The choice of musical mode, the scale and tonal system used, carried emotional associations that complemented the lyrics. A song in minor mode might express melancholy or longing, while major mode suggested joy and celebration. The performance context created opportunities for directed communication. A minstrel performing at a feast could make eye contact with the intended recipient during particularly significant verses, directing the general song to specific listener. The physical positioning, who the performer faced, where he looked, how he gestured, could indicate whom the performance addressed without making the address verbally explicit. The commissioning of songs by lovers to be performed by minstrels created chain of communication where the original author, the performer, and the recipient all understood the message's personal nature. While general audience heard only entertaining song, a nobleman might commission a song for a minstrel to perform at another court, where the nobleman's beloved resided, creating long-distance communication through artistic intermediary. The reply poems, or contrafacta, where one poet would compose response to another's work, using the same melody and metrical structure, but with new words, created poetic dialogues lovers could conduct extended exchanges through this medium, with each new poem responding to the previous one in ongoing conversation that was simultaneously public performance and private dialogue. The alba or dawn songs describing lovers parting at daybreak after secret night together weren't merely literary convention but reflected real situations. The alba's conventions, the watchman warning of approaching day, the lovers' reluctance to part, their fears of discovery, provided vocabulary for discussing actual secret meetings. A lover might reference a particular alba, knowing the beloved would understand the reference to their own situation. The pastorella or pastorelle depicting night encountering shepherdess could encode messages about intended meetings in particular locations. The rural settings described in pastorellas might reference actual locations where lovers plan to meet, with the song serving as communication about time and place disguised as conventional poetic entertainment. The reverdi or spring songs celebrating renewal and new love provided seasonal framing for declarations of affection. Performing or referencing a reverdi in spring could declare new love or renewed passion, with the seasonal setting providing appropriate context. The conventional association of spring with love made such songs appropriate for general performance while allowing personal application. The crusade songs expressing longing and separation addressed situations many actual lovers faced when knights departed on crusade or military campaigns. The conventional expressions of love surviving distance, of faithfulness during separation, of hope for reunion could apply equally to general audiences' experiences and to specific lovers' situations, creating multiple levels of meaning. The dancing songs or carols that accompanied medieval dancing could contain messages in their lyrics that lovers would hear while dancing together. The physical proximity dancing allowed, combined with lyrics expressing romantic sentiments, created charged contexts where songs' words became personal addresses between dancing partners. The repeated refrains in dancing songs ensured that key messages would be heard multiple times during the dance. The laments and complaints describing love's sufferings could express real emotions while conforming to conventional forms. The lover genuinely suffering from separation, from unrequited love, or from the dangers of forbidden love could express authentic feelings through conventional forms that protected identity while providing emotional release. The audience might appreciate the artistry, while the intended recipient understood the personal authenticity. The interpretation of symbols within songs required cultural literacy and sometimes private knowledge. References to particular flowers, animals, colours, or objects carried conventional meanings, but lovers could establish private variations. A song praising violets might conventionally suggest humility, but to lovers who'd first met in a violet-filled garden, the reference would carry specific personal meaning beyond conventional symbolism. The learning and memorization of songs created lasting vehicles for remembering relationships. A lover could preserve memory of beloved by learning songs associated with their relationship, performing them privately to revive memories, or teaching them to others without revealing personal significance. The songs became repositories of emotional history that could be accessed long after relationships ended. The written preservation of lyrics allowed messages to endure beyond performances. Manuscripts collecting song lyrics could be treasured possessions containing embedded messages that readers could return to repeatedly. The writing down of songs that had initially been oral performances fixed them in forms that could be studied for hidden meanings and that could be preserved as mementos. The dangers included the possibility of songs being too transparent about actual identities or situations, leading to scandal. The line between artistically depicting love and revealing actual affairs was sometimes crossed, with consequences for those involved. The famous case of Pierre Abelard and Héloïse included Abelard's songs celebrating their love becoming too widely known, contributing to the scandal that destroyed their relationship and led to Abelard's castration. Understanding music and poetry as communication media reveals how medieval lovers employed artistic expression as practical means of conveying messages, declarations, and emotions. The artistic forms provided both cover. These were just songs and poems, conventional entertainment, and genuine communication system where sophisticated encoding allowed specific messages to reach intended recipients, while general audiences appreciated only the surface artistry. The dual nature of these communications, simultaneously art and message, public performance and private address, demonstrates the sophistication of medieval communication strategies and the integration of aesthetic and practical purposes in serving lovers' needs for expression within constraining social circumstances. The exchange of physical objects between lovers created tangible bonds and provided material evidence of relationships that otherwise existed only in emotions and secret meetings. Understanding the types of objects exchanged, their symbolic meanings, and their practical functions reveals how lovers used material culture to express and preserve affection. The lock of hair represented the most intimate and personal token a lover could give. Hair was part of the beloved's body, carried her essence, and would endure long after the moment of giving a lady's hair, particularly, was considered her crowning glory, and giving a lock represented significant gift of self. The hair could be worn in a locket, preserved in a container, or even woven into jewellery, creating lasting physical connection to the beloved. The gloves, as mentioned earlier, carried layered significance. Beyond their symbolic meaning of granted intimacy, the physical gloves themselves became treasured possessions. A knight might wear a lady's glove throughout a campaign, preserving it despite mud, blood, and weather as testament to devotion. The gradual deterioration of such treasured gloves made them even more precious, as evidence of trials endured while maintaining connection to the beloved. The rings exchanged between lovers served multiple functions. As symbols, they represented commitment and union. As physical objects, they could be worn constantly, providing tangible reminders and creating visible marks of connection. Some rings contained messages engraved on inner surfaces invisible to observers, but constantly felt by wearers. Others had compartments for hiding messages, locks of hair, or other tiny treasures. The gimel rings, complex rings made of interlocking pieces, could be divided between lovers, each wearing one part that fit together with the other when reunited. The decorated belts or girdles given as gifts combined practical utility with intimate significance. The placement of belts on women's bodies meant that recipients would feel the gift constantly, creating physical awareness of the giver. The elaborate decoration of some belts with precious metals, jewels, and intricate craftsmanship made them valuable objects whose worth testified to the giver's devotion and resources. The illuminated books, particularly of poetry, romances, or religious texts, served as gifts that combined intellectual and romantic dimensions. A book of courtly romances given by a lover declared shared literary culture and provided the recipient with material to read that would consistently reference romantic love. Books of hours, prayer books, could contain inserted love letters or messages within their sacred contents, creating juxtaposition of sacred and profane that was both transgressive and meaningful. The carved or decorated boxes and containers provided vehicles for preserving other tokens and love letters. A finely crafted box could itself be a significant gift, while also serving practical function of storing correspondence and mementos safely. Some boxes contained secret compartments for particularly sensitive materials, creating layers of concealment that protected dangerous evidence while allowing lovers to preserve precious objects. The mirrors, particularly small decorated hand mirrors, carried symbolic associations with vanity, but also with truth, and with seeing oneself as the beloved saw, one a mirror given as gift, suggested that the beloved should see herself as the lover saw her, beautiful and perfect. The reflective surface also created metaphoric connection to the lover's gaze, making the mirror stand in for the lover's presence when actually apart. The religious relics and medallions created ambiguous category. These objects had genuine religious significance and could be given as appropriate spiritual gifts. Yet the practice of lovers exchanging relics or blessed objects created tangible connections, while covering romantic intent with religious purpose. A medallion blessed by pilgrimage could be legitimately given while carrying private romantic significance beyond its religious function. The decorated handkerchiefs embroidered by ladies demonstrated both artistic skill and devotion. The hours spent creating elaborate embroidered handkerchiefs testified to the creator's affection, with each stitch representing time spent thinking of the beloved. The imagery chosen for embroidery could carry symbolic meaning: hearts, flowers, intertwined initials or other romantic symbols that declared the giver's emotions. The specially prepared foods or sweets given as gifts combined temporary physical pleasure with gesture of caring. A lady who sent carefully prepared delicacies to her beloved demonstrated attention to his preferences and pleasure. The consumption of such gifts created intimate experience of taking into one's body something the beloved had prepared, creating physical incorporation of the lover's care. The perfumed gloves or scented items carried the giver's signature scent, creating olfactory connection. When the recipient used or wore such items, the associated scent would trigger memories and create sensory reminder of the beloved. The intimate association between scent and memory made perfumed gifts particularly effective at maintaining connection across separation. The carved ivory or wooden objects including combs, gaming pieces, and decorative items combined artistry with utility. A comb given as gift would be used in hair care, with each use creating moment of thinking about the giver. Gaming pieces used in chess or other games would come to mind during each game played, creating regular mental connection to the beloved. The tapestries or embroidered wall hangings depicting romantic scenes could be given as gifts by wealthy lovers. These large, expensive items demonstrated resources, while their imagery declared romantic values and created constant visual reminders. A lady with a tapestry depicting Tristan and Isolde would be reminded daily of romantic love's power and tragedy. The preservation of these tokens required safe storage and discretion. Lovers developed elaborate systems for hiding treasured objects. False bottoms in chests, hidden compartments in furniture, sealed containers buried in gardens. The risk of discovery made possession dangerous, yet the desire to keep mementos was strong enough that many risked preserving evidence despite dangers. The showing of tokens to the beloved during secret meetings created rituals of declaration and reassurance. Displaying that one had preserved and cherished a gift demonstrated ongoing affection and commitment. The physical objects became focal points during meetings, providing tangible evidence of constancy during separations. The destruction of tokens when relationships ended, or when danger became too great, represented painful necessity. Letters burned, jewellery buried or returned, clothing destroyed. The elimination of physical evidence protected participants but required destroying material connections to relationships that had been precious. The decision whether to preserve or destroy created difficult choices between memory and safety. The inheritance of tokens created lasting physical legacy. Objects that survived their original owners could pass to heirs. Sometimes, with unknown romantic histories, a ring or locket cherished for generations might have been a gift between medieval lovers, its specific history lost but its material form enduring as testament to human emotions that transcended its original possessors. Understanding objects as declarations reveals the material dimension of medieval romantic communication. Physical tokens created tangible bonds that outlasted fleeting moments, provided evidence of affection that could be cherished and displayed, and created lasting connections through objects that would endure when the lovers themselves could not meet. The exchange, preservation, display, and sometimes destruction of tokens demonstrates how lovers used material culture to express and preserve emotions within constraining circumstances that tried to reduce love to political arrangement and social obligation. The physical spaces where lovers could meet privately were limited in medieval contexts where privacy was rare and surveillance common. Understanding how particular locations became sites for romantic encounters reveals how lovers employed architecture, landscape, and spatial arrangements to create moments of intimacy within environments generally hostile to secrecy. The gardens represented the most commonly depicted setting for lovers' meetings in medieval literature, and apparently in practice. Gardens combined several advantageous features. They provided outdoor spaces where ladies could legitimately walk without arousing suspicion. They contained hidden corners and paths that offered visual privacy. Their plant life created natural screens and barriers, and their association with growth, fertility, and natural beauty made them symbolically appropriate settings for romantic encounters. The enclosed gardens, or hortus conclusus, particularly served lovers' purposes. These gardens, surrounded by walls or hedges, created defined spaces partially separated from broader household surveillance. The religious symbolism of enclosed gardens, associated with Virgin Mary and with spiritual purity, created interesting tension when such spaces hosted potentially illicit romantic meetings. The spiritual/sensual duality of gardens made them complex symbolic spaces. The design elements of medieval gardens created opportunities for privacy. The raised beds and trellised plants created visual barriers that could shield couples from observers while still allowing them to claim they were merely walking in the garden if discovered. The garden benches and seats positioned in corners or alcoves provided sitting spaces where lovers could linger without immediately visible purpose. The fountains and water features created ambient sound that could mask conversation from distant observers. The arbours and covered walkways created shaded spaces partially hidden from view. The living tunnels formed by trained vines and climbing plants created romantic settings while providing practical concealment. The pergolas covered with roses, grapes, or other plants offered both beauty and privacy, creating spaces that were simultaneously open, not closed rooms that would be obviously inappropriate, and concealed enough for intimate conversation. The seasonal changes in gardens created varying opportunities and challenges. Spring and summer gardens in full growth provided maximum concealment through dense foliage. Autumn gardens becoming bare reduced privacy, but also reduced garden visitors as weather cooled. Winter gardens were largely abandoned, creating opportunities for brave lovers willing to endure cold for sake of private meetings in spaces others avoided. The garden paths and labyrinths created opportunities for planned encounters that could appear accidental. Lovers could arrange to meet at particular points in garden mazes. Their presence in the maze individually explainable, while their meeting at the centre could be staged as coincidence. The winding paths created moments when couples would be briefly invisible from the garden's entrance, or from building windows, creating fleeting opportunities for private words or gestures. The chapels provided another crucial meeting space. Religious devotion was expected and encouraged, making presence in chapel always legitimate. The private prayer that was normal practice meant that two individuals being in chapel simultaneously, while praying separately, aroused no suspicion. Yet the chapel's relative privacy, interrupting prayer, was considered impolite or even impious, created opportunities for lovers to pray near each other, to exchange glances, and sometimes even to speak quietly under guise of prayer. The chapel confessionals created particularly interesting spaces. The architectural feature designed for private confession to priests could occasionally facilitate private conversation between lovers. A lover might position himself near a confessional where his beloved prayed, allowing brief whispered communication that would be confused with religious confession if overheard. The sacred purpose of the space provided excellent cover for secular communication. The towers and elevated rooms in castles offered privacy through isolation. A room in a high tower might have no legitimate purpose for multiple people to visit, yet a lady claiming to enjoy the view or seeking quiet for contemplation could legitimately spend time there, and a lover who managed to reach the tower through servant corridors or external stairs could meet her in relative security. The isolation that made such locations private also made them risky. Discovery meant being caught in obviously inappropriate circumstances with no plausible explanation. The libraries or book rooms in larger castles and manor houses provided legitimate reasons for presence while offering privacy. A lady interested in reading could legitimately spend time in a library, and a gentleman similarly interested could plausibly appear there. The shared intellectual interest provided cover while the typically limited traffic in libraries created privacy. The stacks of books themselves created visual barriers and sound dampening. The stables and outbuildings offered less prestigious but potentially more private meeting locations. A lady claiming to visit her horse or to check on a particular animal could legitimately enter stables, where she might encounter a gentleman on similar legitimate business. The servants working in stables could often be convinced to provide privacy, or at least to look away from noble activities that didn't concern them. The forests and rural landscapes beyond castle walls provided ultimate privacy, but also maximum danger. Meeting in forest clearings or at rural landmarks meant almost no risk of household surveillance, but substantial risks of bandits, wild animals, and the genuine danger of being discovered far from protective walls with no legitimate explanation. The literary depictions of forest meetings emphasized both romance and danger, reflecting real trade-offs between privacy and risk. The architectural features that could facilitate secret meetings included hidden passages and servant stairs that allowed movement between areas without using main corridors. A person who knew these routes could reach various parts of a castle without being seen by others using main pathways. The complex layouts of large medieval buildings, with their many additions and modifications, often created spaces between walls or above ceilings that could serve as hidden routes. The natural features like caves, grottos, or rock formations in estate grounds could become meeting places. These locations existed outside the built environment and therefore outside normal patterns of use and surveillance. A cave or grotto might be known to lovers from childhood exploration, and could serve as secret meeting place precisely because it wasn't incorporated into regular household activity. The timing of meetings exploited daily routines and schedules. Meeting during Mass when most household was in chapel meant few people to observe movements. Meeting during meal times when servants were occupied created opportunities. Meeting during festivals or entertainments when normal routines were disrupted allowed movements that would be noticed on ordinary days to pass unremarked. The use of signals to confirm safety added another layer of protection. A particular flower displayed in a window might indicate the coast was clear, while its absence warned of danger. A curtain arranged in a specific way could communicate whether meeting was safe to attempt. These simple visual signals allowed communication about immediate circumstances without requiring direct contact. The architectural modifications made specifically to facilitate secret meetings occasionally occurred. A sympathetic husband or family member might arrange for particular architectural features. A private door, a hidden stair, a secluded room that would enable secret meetings, either for their own use or to facilitate relationships they approved of despite broader social disapproval. Understanding spaces of meeting reveals how lovers employed existing architecture and landscape features, while sometimes modifying them to create opportunities for private communication and contact. The physical environment was never neutral, but rather either facilitated or hindered secret romance depending on its design, its use patterns, and lovers' creativity in exploiting its possibilities. The spaces themselves became part of the communication system, their selection and use conveying messages about the relationship's nature and about participants' willingness to take varying levels of risk for sake of private time together. The discovery of secret romantic relationships in medieval society brought consequences ranging from mild social embarrassment to death, depending on the status of those involved, whether marriage vows were violated, and various other factors. Understanding the risks and actual punishments reveals both why elaborate communication codes were necessary and what happened when those codes failed to protect participants. The variable consequences reflected medieval society's complex attitudes toward romance, marriage, and propriety. For unmarried lovers of appropriate ranks whose relationship might lead to marriage, discovery might accelerate wedding arrangements rather than bringing severe punishment. The embarrassment of being discovered in compromising circumstances could be managed if families could arrange quick marriage that legitimized the relationship retroactively. Such outcomes depended on the lover's status, their family's relationships, and whether conception had occurred. For married individuals conducting extramarital affairs, consequences were far more severe. Adultery violated both social order and religious law, and the punishments could be extremely harsh. Women faced worse consequences than men due to concerns about legitimate succession. A wife's adultery threatened the certainty of her children's paternity, potentially inserting illegitimate heirs into inheritance lines. The asymmetry in punishment reflected the asymmetric stakes as medieval society understood them. The ecclesiastical courts handled many adultery cases, applying canon law that could impose penances ranging from public humiliation to excommunication. The church court's penalties focused on spiritual discipline and public acknowledgement of sin rather than physical punishment, but the social consequences of public penance could be devastating. A person required to do public penance for adultery faced lasting stigma that affected their entire family. The secular courts could impose more severe physical punishments. The specific penalties varied by jurisdiction and by the individual's status, but they could include corporal punishment, fines, imprisonment, or even death in extreme cases. The famous case of Francesca da Rimini and Paolo Malatesta, immortalized in Dante's Inferno, ended with both lovers murdered by Francesca's husband when he discovered their affair, a private punishment that was legally questionable but socially understandable within medieval honour codes. The punishments for women discovered in adultery could be particularly brutal. Beyond legal penalties, women faced social death, reputation destroyed, marriage ended, family disgraced, future prospects eliminated. Some women were confined to convents permanently after discovered affairs, their entire lives forcibly redirected into religious celibacy as punishment for sexual transgression. The convent sentence was presented as merciful alternative to harsher penalties but amounted to lifelong imprisonment. The men involved faced consequences as well, though generally less severe than women. A man discovered in adultery faced social criticism, possible legal penalties, and damaged reputation, but these consequences typically didn't end his career or social participation as completely as they did for women. The double standard reflected medieval beliefs about gender, honour, and the different stakes of male versus female sexual transgression. The specific dangers to accomplices and go-betweens were real and sometimes severe. Servants who facilitated affairs could be dismissed, beaten, imprisoned, or in extreme cases executed if the discovered affair involved persons of very high status or if the consequences were particularly catastrophic. The dependency of servants on their employers made them vulnerable to punishment that they had little ability to resist or appeal. The methods of discovery varied. Sometimes affairs were revealed through informants, dismissed servants seeking revenge, rivals seeking to damage reputations, or people with grievances using knowledge of affairs as weapons. Physical evidence like intercepted letters or discovered tokens could prove relationships that participants denied. Unwanted pregnancies provided undeniable evidence of relationships that couldn't be explained away. Chance encounters where lovers were discovered in compromising circumstances despite precautions brought sudden revelation. The pregnancy outcome of affairs created particular complications. An unmarried woman who became pregnant faced catastrophic social consequences, with little recourse unless the child's father could be compelled to marry her or to at least acknowledge the child. A married woman who became pregnant by someone other than her husband faced danger of discovery if the child's appearance or timing revealed the truth. The infanticide of illegitimate children, while abhorred and punished, occurred with sufficient frequency to indicate the desperate situations that unwanted pregnancies created. The murder of discovered lovers by cuckolded husbands, while illegal, was often treated leniently by courts, sympathetic to the husband's honour concerns. The legal doctrine of crime of passion had medieval precedents in the recognition that discovering adultery could drive reasonable people to violence that wouldn't be fully premeditated murder. The relative leniency shown to husbands who killed unfaithful wives and their lovers reinforced the danger that discovery posed. The blackmail and extortion possibilities created by knowledge of secret affairs meant that discovery didn't always lead to immediate public revelation. Someone who learned of an affair might use that knowledge to extract money, favours, or other benefits from participants desperate to prevent wider discovery. The vulnerability to blackmail created ongoing danger that could persist long after relationships ended. The literary and historical examples of disastrous discoveries provided cautionary tales that everyone knew. The stories of Lancelot and Guinevere, Tristan and Isolde, Paolo and Francesca, all ended tragically with lovers separated by death, exile, or other catastrophes. These narratives, widely known through literature and song, constantly reminded medieval people of the dangers that secret romance entailed. Yet despite the dangers, secret romances continued, suggesting that for many the risks seemed worth taking. The gap between the loveless arranged marriages that social structure imposed and the human need for emotional and romantic connection created situations where people chose to risk consequences rather than to live without love. The very severity of potential punishments testifies to how common such relationships were. If they had been rare, the elaborate legal and social structures to punish them wouldn't have been necessary. The survival strategies when affairs were suspected but not proven included denial, destruction of evidence, and leveraging social connections. If suspicions arose, lovers would immediately destroy letters, return tokens, and eliminate physical evidence. They would enlist supporters to provide alibis or to testify to innocent character. They would, if possible, separate and cease contact, allowing suspicions to die without confirmation. The social management of discovered affairs sometimes involved negotiations where families arranged outcomes that minimize scandal, rather than pursuing maximum punishment. A discreet separation, a retirement to monastery or convent, an arranged marriage to a distant noble. Various solutions might be quietly arranged to handle situations that would cause scandal if handled publicly. The preference for managing problems privately rather than through public scandal shows that even medieval society with its harsh official morality recognized pragmatic need to limit damage rather than maximizing punishment. Understanding the dangers and consequences reveals why elaborate secret communication systems were necessary, and why lovers invested such effort in maintaining discretion. The stakes were real, and discovery could bring catastrophic outcomes. Yet the persistence of secret romances despite these dangers demonstrates that human emotional needs could motivate people to accept significant risks. The tragic outcomes that sometimes resulted provided cautionary lessons, but they didn't eliminate the behaviours they warned against, suggesting that the human capacity for hope and the human need for love remained powerful despite knowledge of possible consequences. As this exploration of secret codes used by medieval lovers concludes, what emerges most powerfully is recognition of the universal human need to express romantic love and the extraordinary creativity that this need inspires when confronted with social constraints designed to suppress or control it. The codes examined, floral languages, courtly conventions, visual signals, musical messages, physical tokens, spatial arrangements, and networks of accomplices, demonstrate that when societies try to reduce love to political arrangement and economic transaction, humans develop sophisticated systems to preserve love's emotional and romantic dimensions despite official denial of their importance. The elaborate communication system medieval lovers developed weren't merely quaint historical curiosities, but represented genuine solutions to real problems. When social structures arranged marriages for political and economic purposes, when expressing romantic feelings could bring severe punishment, when entire lives could be destroyed by discovered passion, the need for coded communication that allowed expression while providing protection became urgent practical necessity. The creativity demonstrated in developing these codes reveals both human ingenuity and the strength of the drive to connect romantically, regardless of social obstacles. The multiplicity of communication channels, flowers, colours, jewellery, music, poetry, gestures, spaces, intermediaries, created redundant systems where blocked communication through one channel could be redirected through another. The sophistication of combining multiple codes simultaneously allowed complex messages and sustained dialogues that single communication methods couldn't support. A lover could declare passion through wearing particular colours, while requesting a meeting through sending particular flowers, while expressing constancy through wearing a gifted ring, creating multi-layered message that reinforced and clarified its components through their combination. The cultural framework of courtly love provided both legitimacy and vocabulary for relationships that social structures otherwise denied legitimate expression by elevating romantic love to noble pursuit worthy of great literature. by creating elaborate conventions that refined and civilized passionate emotions, and by providing language and concepts that allowed discussion of what was otherwise unspeakable. The courtly love tradition validated feelings that official culture tried to suppress, while simultaneously channeling them in ways that prevented complete social disruption. The human costs of these secret romances deserve acknowledgement alongside appreciation of lovers' creativity. The constant anxiety about discovery, the risk of catastrophic consequences, the pain of maintaining relationships in secret without social recognition, the separations and limitations that secrecy imposed, all created genuine suffering. Some relationships survived these challenges, and perhaps were strengthened by adversity overcome. Others were destroyed by the very forces that created need for secrecy. The tragic outcomes that sometimes resulted, destroyed lives, forced separations, even deaths, demonstrate that the stakes were real, and that not all stories had happy endings. The gender asymmetry and consequences reflects broader medieval gender inequities. Women faced far harsher punishment for discovered affairs, had fewer options for managing consequences, and bore the physical risks of pregnancy that made secret relationships more dangerous for them than for men. Yet women participated in these relationships, developed the codes, and took the risks, suggesting that for many the chance at emotional connection and romantic love seemed worth the disproportionate dangers they faced. The complicity networks that enabled secret romances demonstrate that these weren't merely individual rebellions, but had tacit social support from servants, friends, and others who participated in maintaining secrecy. The willingness of go-betweens to take risks, of confidants to keep secrets, and of broader circles to look away when convenient suggest that official morality, condemning extramarital romance, didn't entirely reflect actual social attitudes, which were more complex and conflicted than official positions acknowledged. The influence on subsequent romantic culture has been substantial. The courtly love tradition shaped Western ideas about romance's nature, about the value of emotional connection, about the worthiness of suffering for love, and about countless other concepts that continue influencing how modern people understand and express romantic feelings. The elaborate coded communications that medieval lovers developed evolved into later traditions. The Victorian language of flowers, the symbolic gifts and gestures that remain part of romantic culture, the idea of romance as worthy of elaborate expression and celebration. The contemporary relevance includes recognizing that secret communication between lovers remains necessary in various circumstances even today. People conducting relationships that social disapproval threatens, across religious boundaries, across races in racist societies, between people of the same sex in homophobic cultures, or in various other configurations that dominant culture condemns, continue developing codes and secret communication systems that serve similar protective functions as medieval lovers' codes. The universal human need for romantic connection finds expression regardless of social obstacles, and the ingenuity people display in overcoming those obstacles persists across vastly different historical and cultural contexts. The artistic and aesthetic legacy of medieval romantic culture remains visible in countless later works. The poetry, music, visual arts, and literature created within and about courtly love tradition influenced all subsequent Western artistic expression about romance. The symbols developed, roses for love, violets for faithfulness, matching rings for commitment, countless others, persist in recognizable forms today. The artistic impulse that secret romances inspired created lasting cultural achievements that outlived the specific relationships and circumstances that initially motivated them. The recognition that elaborate communication codes were necessary because direct expression was dangerous or impossible reveals the constraining nature of medieval social structures around marriage and romance. Modern people who take for granted ability to express romantic feelings openly, to choose marriage partners based on affection, and to conduct relationships without elaborate secrecy, may find medieval constraints shocking. Yet understanding those constraints and the creative responses they inspired illuminates both how different medieval society was and how similar medieval people were, facing different circumstances but experiencing the same fundamental human needs for love, connection, and emotional expression. The balance between celebrating lovers' creativity and acknowledging the tragic necessity for such creativity characterises honest assessment of medieval romantic communication. The codes were brilliant solutions to genuine problems, demonstrating human ingenuity and the power of love to inspire creativity. Yet the problems themselves, social structures that ignored emotional needs, arranged marriages that treated individuals as political pawns, punishment of genuine affection because it threatened property arrangements, deserve recognition as creating unnecessary suffering that the creative communication codes could only partially ameliorate. As light returns and this journey through medieval lovers' secret codes concludes, what lingers is profound recognition that human need for romantic expression persists across all circumstances, that creativity flourishes under constraint, and that love finds ways to declare itself regardless of obstacles societies construct. The medieval lovers who developed elaborate codes to express feelings that social structures denied legitimate expression demonstrated both the universality of romantic love and the particular historical circumstances that shaped how love could be expressed. Their legacy includes not just the specific codes and symbols, many of which persist in modified forms, but also the broader recognition that human emotional needs cannot be entirely suppressed by social engineering, that genuine connection will find expression despite official denial, and that the human capacity for creating meaning through symbols and codes enables communication even when direct speech is forbidden. The secret codes of medieval lovers thus represent both historically specific responses to particular constraints and timeless demonstrations of human creativity in service of fundamental emotional needs that persist across all times and places where humans form romantic attachments, despite social disapproval or control. The story of how medieval people loved in secret, expressed feelings through elaborate codes, risked severe consequences for emotional connection, and created lasting artistic and cultural legacies from their constrained circumstances, reminds us that human emotional life always exceeds the boundaries that social structures try to impose, and that the capacity to create meaning, to communicate through symbols, and to form genuine connections despite obstacles remains among the most distinctively human capabilities across all the varied circumstances that history presents.